Hello and welcome to the pilot episode of FutureLab. This is a podcast where we'll be exploring the concept of health span and optimizing human potential. And I'm your host, Danny Urbinder, and I'm thrilled to embark on this journey with you as we explore the multifaceted world of optimal well-being through all stages of life. And joining me are my two esteemed co-hosts. We have Dr. Denise Furness.
Hello.
And Trevor Hendy, who many might know.
Yeah, thanks, mate. And you did well to get through that first little bit there.
That was
too.
probably the hardest bit of what's going to...
A big build-up. We're away, episode number one.
How do I do this
way.
without looking like I'm actually reading? And I just gave that away. I read.
Yes. No, good to be here.
Absolutely. So, look, I thought it might be good to start. This is a show about health span. It's about optimizing well-being throughout life. And there are so many facets to that. There are so many things to consider when we aim to have not just a long life, but a good life and a healthy life. So we're going to be encompassing all of that. But I think to sort of get a bit of background as to why we're doing this and where your passions lie from, it might be good to sort of get an idea of your background and see how that feeds into what we're going to be talking about. Maybe, Trevor, do you want to start?
Sure. Stoked to be with you guys, by the way. This is a new family that we've sort of kicked off here, but and we've got some exciting things planned for people that we want to bring on. We'll talk more about that. But I've been loving this byline of science and soul, because FutureLab, what are we really talking about? We want to help people fulfill their human potential. You know, what is the human potential? And what a great question. Rather than the answer, the question just needs to be held for eternity. You know, what is the human potential? So we can keep expanding and learning what that is. So science and soul, I love the idea that we're looking at it from the scientific point of view all the way down to every single discovery. Denise, I love your work. I love what you do, and you're incredible at what you do. So I can't wait to get into your brain and your heart and understand a whole lot more. But also the soul side as well, because that's sort of segueing into why I'm sitting here as well, is that I've been on quite an incredible journey, I suppose a consciousness journey, an awakening journey. And put simply, I was a professional athlete, world Ironman champion, raced at the top of my field at a time when the sport became super popular in Australia. We were front of magazine covers and hung out with Madonna and Michael Jackson and
all
that sort of stuff. And Vitabrits, I was a 14 Vitabrits guy, and went on Baywatch and all those sort of things. Some fun we can have talking about at some point in time. But basically, I was exposed to the idea of what success looks like and feels like in its version of that, I suppose, that physical success. Like, I'm winning, I'm succeeding, I'm on the top of the world. You know, that the old Zoolander quote. You know, that Hansel's so hot right now. You know, like the Iron Man was so hot right now. And we had this experience, all of us, Guy Leach, myself, Craig Riddington, Dwayne Tyers, Grant Kenny, Guy Andrews, the Mercer Boys, all that sort of stuff. We had this experience of being at the top of our game, and that was fascinating, because you would think that we were fulfilling our potential because we were racing incredibly well. Yeah. But what actually happened during that period of time was I was still winning races, but I was banking up inside of myself a whole lot of losses. So relationship losses, failure to be able to communicate properly. Fish out of water. When I was in the water, I was like, I could move around like a god in the water, so to speak, but out of the water, I was like, didn't really know who I was or what I was. I had a persona, which I like to call, from some work that I've done in the past, but a front cover or a shop front of strong, the Ironman, everything else. But I had a back cover that was hidden of deep fears and insecurities that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't lovable enough, that I wouldn't be liked or admired if I wasn't winning or succeeding and all that sort of stuff. So
that was your drive then? Was that a big part of your drive to success?
This is the awakening point, was when I'm winning and my body's collapsing. Right. Shoulder injuries, tendinitis, hip collapsing, collapsed arch, all sorts of weird things going on. Best doctors, best physios, anti-inflammatories, icing, TENS machines, which were at the head of the pack then, cutting edge science, TENS machines, all that sort of stuff. And nothing was fixing it. It was like I was going around in circles and it was getting worse, until I met the right people that basically said to me, no, you've got some chemical, emotional, structural imbalances. emotional? What do you mean? You know? And I was told, and I'll go into that more later stage, but I was told that I might have some suppressed anger issues. To which I thought, what the is this guy talking about? You know?
So you stormed off angrily.
Yeah, I was actually marching around behind myself. You know, there was like another self behind. I was smiling just like the front cover would. Like me, I was the lovable guy from next door, but behind that, I had suppressed anger, suppressed sadness, you know, grief, loss, failure, all sorts of different things were sitting inside of me. And so it sent me down a path, and this is funny where the story starts, is because it sent me down a path of going backwards to see where did this dis-ease come from? Where did all these disturbed frequencies in my body, why are my shoulders so out of whack, you know? And I just really simply, I realized after a while that when I breathed, I could swim bilaterally, breathe both sides. But when I was in a race, and it really came down to it, I would breathe one side because I would muscle up on one side and I'd be breathing thinking they're not going to beat me, you know? And so where do you think I developed the tendinitis most? You know, I developed it one side more than on the other because the patterns, the habits, the thinking, but behind that, the emotions that led to me racing in dis-ease. And when I broke through it and I got in the flow with the ocean and I found a way to be in the moment, and I was like, and I had the love of my family and the love of my relationship and all those sort of things. My young daughter, you know, I was married and had a daughter at 19. You know, so there's so many things behind the story I'll go into more at later detail.
It's interesting though. There's just one thing that I picked up is, well, when you said you had all these injuries and you related that back more to an emotional element, whereas in my mind I thought, well, yeah, you're training to be an Ironman. Of course you're going to have injury.
Yes.
But then you said when you're actually in a race, you almost resorted back to a way of using your mind and body that would have made it more likely for you to get an injury.
100%.
So had you been in a more balanced state,
a conscious state, people around me that with a more holistic awareness of what contributes to a flowing body.
Yeah.
So I was literally in win at all costs.
Yeah.
And so when you're in win at all costs, when you hit win at all costs, so you have to have the costs as part of it.
Yeah.
And the costs were body, relationships, financial stuff. Money would come and go.
Yeah.
You know, relationships would come and go. And body health was coming and going as well. So it was like I had this little bubble that I could perform like a superhero in, and that slowly was closing in on me till the body, you know, that old something's got to give saying. So the dis-ease that was inside of me was leading, and it came from, and I'll tell more of that story at another point in time, but it came from right back at the start of being 13, 14 and 15 and feeling bullied in school and in life, and even in the surf club that I love and adore. I was from Surfers Paradise Surf Club, and I owe so much of my life and success to the club and the people around the club. But the common thinking at the time was dog eat dog. You know, it was actually win at all costs. And so you were either winning or you were being put down. Yeah. You know, and so that was that. Back in the day, we used to call it toughening up and growing up strong. Now we actually call it bullying, you know, and we go, that's actually not okay because it creates almost like something that's caught inside of us. So I didn't process those things well.
So that's like a trauma.
It's a trauma. It's 100% a trauma. Yeah. So it doesn't show as a trauma at the start because you rise above it, you push it down, and you become the guy that's never going to be bullied again. Yeah. And that was me. So I never wanted to be bullied again. I wanted to get the girl. So if I can win, then I feel good enough about myself because the guy that was the Australian champion, he got the girl, he even got my girlfriend. You know, and so there's a whole backstory to why I became the guy that wanted to get the girl and get the money and get the last laugh and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So relating it back to the original question is that all of a sudden somebody said, after I'd circled around and around and around with the best Western medicines, so to speak, someone said, no, you need to look inside and you need to get honest. And I said, no, I'm good. And they said, no. I said, I'm fine. And then they said, fine, I'm going to swear for the first time if we're okay with this. This
it's
spiritual,
setting the tone for what to expect, everyone.
This spiritual
You're
teacher.
You're setting the tone now.
This spiritual teacher said to me, fine stands for fucking intense negative energy. That's what you really are. That's what's sitting inside of you. And nice is negative intention, covert energy. You know, it's covered up. And I was like, what? And he goes, you're being the nice guy and the good guy, but underneath you would kill to win. Yeah. And I'm like, yes. He's like, well, that you can't switch that off. Why do you think your relationship's struggling? Why do you think your body's struggling? Because that dis-ease that you're racing from to get the result from is causing you trauma on the inside every day that you carry it forward. So you said something really cool before. You said way of getting my body and mind or whatever. It was like, it became a way of being. So it was my default setting, and ultimately it becomes the alter ego. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I am. Yeah, I do. You know, and so then when we got more famous or well known, it just added to that sense of separation between me and the really holistic, beautiful things that I grew up, you know, exploring in life, traveling around Australia with my family and growing up around Indigenous settlements in the Northern Territory and all that sort of stuff. And
so as your success grew, did you find that with that process, you became more and more removed from that inner self that you now are embracing?
Who I really am. And I think you can probably feel it when I say it, is that I actually care about people. Like I really think about people and I feel. I walk past someone on the street and I can bawl my eyes out crying when I walk past and feel, wow, it's the life that person's going through. Yeah. I'm now wise enough to know to not, because I was a lifesaver, so I tried to rescue everybody. I'm now wise enough to know not to rescue, to not go into rescue, but I'm also there to go, hey, do you want a hand up? You know, and it's just in my nature is to actually feel the connection of all things, as opposed to I'm winning, I don't have to worry about that. And I think for me that summarizes the way I see the world at the moment. I think the great truth is we are all connected. And even our genetics, and I love the word epigenetics because it says our genetics are connected to our environment. So I love exploring, well, what is your environment? You know, if you're a frequency, you know, a vibrational being that has frequency, which we know is in our cells, and we know everything has frequency. And then I'd also almost say, to get a bit woohoo for a moment, I'm like, I think we're celestial beings. I think we have an element of some sort of magic about us. It's like our own version of the sun that we shine, you know. So literally,
we'll go into more detail about how you got to that point, because I'm fascinated to know. We don't have to go through that now. We've got lots of episodes to cover that. But just at what point? I'm just interested. You don't have to tell me now, but at what point, beyond your success or during your success as an Ironman, did those inner feelings start to well up or start to present themselves where you couldn't ignore them anymore? And then I'm interested to know, well, what happened then? Was that a crisis? Was that an epiphany?
Absolutely.
Was that So we'll
and you know what? Only when it happened was when it all got too hard to keep it away. It was going to happen. Something's got to give. It had to come through. And so you could say it was the awakening that was waiting to happen. And then I met all these crazy people that thought outside the box, that changed the way I saw the world. And as soon as I changed the way I saw the world, my world changed. My relationships healed. My body healed. I went on to have record success the next year after I met the right people at the right time. My old crazy chiropractor mate, Keith Maitland, you know, stood there and said, he was the one that said, you've got anger issues. And the very next year I had 10 international level races and I got 8 firsts and 2 seconds.
Wow.
I was standing in ocean conditions when you can't control anything. And I was standing on the line just laughing and loving and with a tear in my eye thinking how much I love Grant Kenny and how much I love Craig Riddington and Leachy and all that sort of stuff.
Because you beat him.
The true nature, the true nature started to come through, and what it became was win on all levels rather than win at all costs. And it's not a mentality; it's more of a recognition that we are more connected than we realize. And that's what I love about what we're about to do, is because you look right down into the cell and the genetics of everything and the frequency and the vibration and its original blueprints and all these sort of things. And we can answer all these questions and put these two worlds together.
Well, why don't we move on
I'm
to
super
Denise?
excited.
Let's hear your story.
Yeah, it's interesting how you mentioned about, you know, this awakening happened during a crisis. And I think sometimes a crisis or an event that might actually seem like the worst thing in the world, like a diagnosis of a disease, you know, obviously work in this health space, actually can be an opportunity to stop and go, what is happening in my body? I'm not listening. Something like you talked about this dis-ease. You know, when we get sick, and so my story, just to step back a little bit, want to just jump into answering all those things there. But so I'm a geneticist, everyone, and Danny and I have actually worked together before. But I'm new to meeting Trevor, but we have just hit it off like
brother and sister.
I know, in like 5 seconds. Like, oh my God, I love you. And we are all so excited to bring this podcast to you because we genuinely feel that we have an opportunity to share so much information with you. And some of you listening might actually be going through a crisis, or you might have a chronic health disease and you might think that there are no options. And we are here to share with you the many, many options there are, because the world is getting sicker. We are not taking care of ourselves and we are becoming disconnected from this world. You talked about being disconnected from yourself. I would say as a geneticist too, we are disconnected from the world around us. We have got to a place as humans where we think and feel, and me too, I'm not saying I'm immune to this, where we are superior, we are above all other animals, the plants, the ocean, we deserve all the resources, we're amazing, we're the best. But how did we get here? How did us as humans become so smart, so clever, and able to utilize all these things around us, such problem solvers, building and creating cities and technology? We became this because our DNA with our environment, particularly our nutrients, have evolved, and our brain has grown, and it's amazing, but we rely on our environment. And when we are working in harmony with our environment, eating foods that give us the nutrients that our DNA needs for all these little epigenetic things that we'll tell you about, when we're putting in the good signals, clean air, just even the smell, everything, all these senses are literally turning on genes in your body. And you can be turning on genes that are going to be associated with health and happiness and wellness and healing. Even if you're sick, you can heal. Your body's always changing. You are not stagnant. We are dynamic beings that are changing all the time. If you change your environment, change your outlook, things will change on the inside.
Genes aren't destiny.
Genes are not your destiny, but they do play a big role in the sense that, and no doubt we'll get into all of this stuff as all the podcasts go on. You will find, listeners, I can't help but go back to genetics because that's what I do. And I'm looking forward to bouncing off you, Trevor, and Danny too, because you'll be able to bring in other aspects too. But, the genetics, they're important. I have a genetic disposition, susceptibility, something that increases my risk. I am genetically more susceptible to an autoimmune disease called Graves' disease. Now, I've had that, and I had it before I understood the genetics of it. But, my story, aside from being a geneticist, being an academic for 10 years, now working as a practitioner for the last 10 years, is that my pivotal moment was when I got sick, and then I was told by the endocrinologist, we've got an autoimmune disease. It's okay. It's common. Lots of women get this. We can treat it. We're going to give you radioactive iodide. I had a baby. I was told I couldn't be with my baby. I couldn't breastfeed. I couldn't sleep with my husband. Just thinking, you can't take me away from a child. Just had a baby. And no, it's fine. We can give you thyroxine. We can put you on hormone replacement. That's what we do. It's okay. We can treat you. And you're like, well, doesn't sound okay.
Doesn't sound good.
Doesn't sound good at all. And I said, what are my options? Oh, no, there's no option. That's what we do. You've got aggressive Graves' disease. That's why you're so sick. So, and I was put on some anti-thyroid medication first, but this is not a long-term thing. It's like they put you on this and then, have...
But we'll go through your story,
yes,
your health journey, because it's amazing.
Yes.
We'll dedicate a program to that.
Yeah.
Because I think that we can explain how you went down the road that you did to get well. And we can say you got well at the end of that because clearly you're
yes,
sitting here
100%. And have helped so many patients since.
And,
we spoke about last night. We went to dinner and I said, I was talking to Trev and just said, in a way, it was a blessing because now I can share that information with people. And through my knowledge as a scientist, so I was a scientist for the first 10 years, now like more a health practitioner. But when I'm sitting there with this doctor who I do genuinely believe thought that he was helping because that's what he knew. But I said, I just don't understand how I can have a disease and you're saying that's it because something's caused it. Can't we look for what caused it? Our bodies are changing, our cells are replicating, different genes are being turned on. Epigenetically, we can have big shifts, but anyway, his response, and we will get into it, but was, no, you will die early and you won't have any more children if you don't go down that route. And that's very confronting, and I'll never forget that. Obviously, I didn't go down that route, but for those of you listening who are looking to explore other options or ways to possibly heal yourself, know that you should always ask questions and you should always listen to your gut, because that didn't feel right to me. Regardless of even my genetics background, it didn't feel right to me, even though he was trying to tell me, oh, no, this is okay. This is what we do.
But you had the benefit of not just your genetics background, but you also had a nutrition background.
Yes.
You were able to think holistically about all of that. And we'll talk about that in a future episode. But it's that mindset that allowed you to question what the doctor was saying and allow you to explore different options, which clearly was to your benefit.
Can I expand on that for a sec? Because this is what I love about this part of your story. Obviously, we'll do the rest of the story later. But in that situation, because people will understand this, that the doctor supposedly knows what you need. So in the hierarchy, the doctor has the power, and you're the one that's sitting there being told what will happen, what should happen, blah, blah, including, right up to some pretty gnarly, advice you've been given there. But in that moment, you had three things. You're a geneticist. So what you knew, which was actually higher up in the hierarchy to what he knew, because it's further behind, it's actually further upstream. He was talking about downstream things. You were talking upstream, where the source comes from, genetics. That's what you've learnt about. So your genetic background helped you to understand and go, hang on, this doesn't match with what I know. In epigenetics, environment, I can change this, we can move this. Your nutritional background, as you said, but the thing that you just said was, even beyond that, in my gut, it didn't feel right.
Yeah, it's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted.
There's three hierarchical things that in that instance were higher than the doctor. Even though his intention was good, his current information was outranked by three things inside of yourself: your genetic background, understanding, your nutritional understanding, and your gut. Your gut feel. All three of those things are far more powerful than what's currently being purveyed across in a lot of these situations. And I think that almost summarizes what we want to do for people, is we want to power people's information up so that their gut can go, I knew this wasn't the end for me. I knew this wasn't the final diagnosis.
Yes.
So we want to save people from this hierarchy that says you're destined to go down this path. If it doesn't feel good, I'll go to it really quickly. I'll go to a Christian saying, I'm not religious, but know the truth and the truth shall set you free. As soon as you go, your gut goes, no, that's not the truth. That's not the truth. And then when you gave yourself a moment to get that information, let it come through, it set you free. You went down a different path. And I think that's a really powerful thing that we'll be exploring as we go, because that's what I love about the story.
Lessons to learn. I was living a lifestyle and I was doing like you were.
Yeah.
I was not in alignment with who I truly am on the inside, on who I wanted to be. And a lot of the things you're exploring, obviously at a different level with me, but, climbing that academic ladder,
same.
postdoc, associate professor, getting grants. I was on this
success.
On this huge success mission. And, but, we'll talk about all of that stuff later. But, and we're not here to say that mainstream medicine is bad, because in a sense, the medication I did go on saved my life and things like that. But I think what people should be able to do is ask questions and check in with themselves, because we're all different. And for some people, what they're told might too much go, okay, all right, I'm just going to do that. But there'll be other people that will go, well, hang on, is there another option? Or that doesn't feel so good. Or why am I feeling like that? And what we all want to do in this podcast is talk to you about healthy aging, living your best life, being the absolute best version of you. And to become the best version of you, sometimes you have to go through something. All of us, life's up and down. Explore that, feel the hard stuff to work out, well, what are my next steps?
So you're really ready to
those
want to change
painful
it.
Points that we've got inside us, the things that we avoid during life, are probably the biggest lessons we have.
Absolutely.
In order to live that long, healthy life.
And
Those are the things that need to be known, that need to be acknowledged, that need to be embraced.
Yes.
Which we, for some reason, either are afraid of or don't like and suppress, usually aren't nearly as scary as what we imagine them to be. But they're the things that are holding us back.
Yeah.
And just on that point around medicine, it should be a tool in our belt.
Yes.
And at all the different types. We could call this podcast a second opinion.
Yeah.
Yes. And a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth.
That's what I was thinking.
Because we don't want to be right.
Opinions.
We don't want to be right. We don't have so many viewpoints that actually, and in the end, your gut becomes right.
Yeah.
Your gut goes, I knew this.
Because we're all different. Genetically, we're different.
Yep.
Our beliefs are different. Our preferences are different. So we don't
our
have
state,
to do
our
all the
state
same
of
thing.
where we're at, where
Yes.
our own evolution is, where what we need to be working through. So what I'm working through is different to what someone else is working through right now. What I've become aware of, someone else hasn't yet, and vice versa. What someone else is aware of, you've got a lot of things you're aware of. I'm not.
So Denise, just before we move on then, just out of interest, because you were working in a very traditional genetics research laboratory environment.
Government scientist.
Yeah. So how did you move from that space to being interested in nutrition to being this holistic practitioner that you are now, that are embracing ideas and concepts that were probably very different to what you were trained in?
I think I was always interested in health. I grew up with a mum that paid a lot of attention to food, so I was very aware of, what is good food. People talk these days about reading labels. I grew up in a household where my mum read all the labels. We were very conscious of what we were eating. So I had an awareness of food as nutrition. Like I already had that basis of food is nutrition, because I think not everyone actually really understands how important food is for health. So I had that sort of interest. And then I went into genetics actually just because I was kind of good at science, to be honest. And I was interested and I asked lots of questions. I just kind of fell into it. And then I was working more in actually virology. So as a geneticist looking at viruses and how they can change and jump from animals to humans, etc. Thought I'd do that forever. Loved it. I worked at the Animal Health Lab. It's an amazing facility in Geelong in Victoria. Shout out to anyone listening at ARL. It was awesome. But I started doing some animal work after a while, and I just wasn't okay with that. Like when you talk about listening to your gut.
Like the cruelty to animals, sort of the testing
sort
of thing?
I mean, you're doing experiments to try to save animals and try to understand viruses. Big picture, you're doing it for the greater good.
So in the industry, that's the acceptable damage, isn't it?
Yes. And I was told, and people knew, I was probably having anxiety attacks. I didn't know what they were then, but I'd break out in a sweat and I would, I'd shake and I'd tremor, and people are like, you'll get used to it. It's okay. I'm like, I just can't inject this animal, or I can't, I can't do.
Get numb to it.
You get numb to it.
I can't do this. And one day I was like, I've got to get out. So I was just looking at PhDs. I never thought I'd do a PhD, and I learned about nutrigenomics. I was like, oh my God, there's this area that looks at genetics and diet, and we actually genetically, we need different amounts of nutrients, or we're better with certain foods. Some of us are a bit more sensitive to dairy or gluten. Some of us need more folate. And I just was amazed.
So you're saying that based on our individual genetics, that in a large part determines what we should be eating.
100%, yes. And that comes from our evolution, our ancestry, how we've evolved. So
but also as individuals as well, yeah?
Yeah.
So we could sort of, come from certain ethnic backgrounds where we would have eaten in a certain way for generations, and that might sort of determine our general diet. But individually, our genes might say, actually, well, yeah, that's your general diet, but you need to eat less of this and more of this. And
if you've had epigenetic changes, or you've got what we call dysbiosis, like changes in your gut bugs, it doesn't that's going to override some of the things in your DNA anyway. So a lot of people.
Hang on, what's an epigenetic change?
An epigenetic change. Woohoo! We're getting into the fun stuff now, everyone. So epigenetics. So if I just step back and explain genetics and epigenetics.
By the way, as you explain this, I think there's some people be listening right now will get huge relief from what you're saying, because the guilt and shame of certain things that they're going through, or they can't change this in their life, or why do I feel moody, or why do I predispose to chasing dopamine hits, or whatever it is, all comes back to answering some of these questions. Like a lot of it can be answered in this area.
Yeah.
So I think it's really beautiful what you're talking about. But anyway, yes. Epigenetics.
So genetics, when I say genetics, I'm talking about the DNA. And your DNA, think of your DNA as your instruction manual. There's an instruction manual for Danny. There's an instruction manual for Trevor. Maybe he's
like
got
a blueprint.
One. Yeah, exactly, a blueprint. And his means that he can swim really well and stuff. And then there's an instruction manual for me. And we're all a little bit different. We have these genetic strengths and weaknesses. And even just to step back there, it may not even be genetic with you, because, it could also be the environment plays a huge role. There probably would be a bit of a genetic susceptibility thing or improvement
So maybe
in some
being able
areas.
to swim well, you say?
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's no swimmers in the family. So I think I developed that. That could be
yes.
epigenetic.
Yeah, exactly. And the
But certainly to
constitution
feel
of-
home in the ocean feels genetic to me.
Yes, something,
interesting.
yeah.
Absolutely. I'm home. As soon as I go in the ocean, I'm like, oh my God, I'm home.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that actually probably is maybe something epigenetic, because epigenetics is different in that it is kind of more memories and things that's happened. But the DNA...
hang on. When you say memories...
Yeah, it's a really simplified, kind of not a true version of
memory
saying
are we
it.
talking about?
Simple's
Yeah.
good to start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess if I just finish with the DNA, you can actually see almost that's a bit of a double helix DNA in that picture there. But your DNA are the instructions and they make you. So when we say genetics, your DNA, which is the whole DNA code, you've got genes, these little instructions that make proteins, and these instructions they affect your physical traits, your height, your eye color, your susceptibility for disease, but also influence your dietary requirements. They influence your ability to manage stress hormones. They influence, everything. So that's your instruction manual. So you've got these instructions, but the epigenetics...
Hold on one second. Question. So if they're instructions, they're also somewhat like a program.
Yes.
So you're running a program. So some of this could be explain why you have programmed responses to things.
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
Just wanted to grab that point. Yep.
But the DNA doesn't work on its own. So you might have actually really good genes, but the truth is when these genes are turned on and kind of read to make a protein, they're instructions, we've got to read them like a recipe book to make a cake, where the cake, you need those ingredients. So for those genes to function properly, we need the ingredients, and the ingredients are actually nutrients. When I talk about making proteins, amino acids we get from our diet, they're proteins. But often we have what are called cofactors. So if you hear about enzymes, you've got an enzyme in the body breaking down this particular food, or you've got an enzyme that's making a molecule in the body, for a certain process. That might require zinc or a B vitamin. So sometimes people think about food and they think, oh, it's energy. I'm getting carbohydrates and I'm getting protein, I'm getting fats. No, you're getting information. Well, it's true. You do get these macronutrients, but there is information in your food that will help your DNA, work as effectively as it could, but also even a step further. I'm not going too deep for podcast one, but there are some things in foods like phytonutrients. We're starting to learn a lot about these things. Things, all the coloured fruits and veggies. You get all these, different.
Greens
you
and
hear
reds
about eat the rainbow. Why eat the rainbow? Those colours go in and turn genes on. And we don't even understand how the food does it, but it knows how to turn on genes at the right time for detox, and that regulates things. Our food regulates stuff in our body. That's why we should, ideally, if we can, eat local and eat in season. People tend to be a lot healthier then.
And eat real food.
Yes.
Because there's so much in food that we just don't know about.
So that would be other information that's in the food. So you've got the food that's doing this magic of switching it on, but then you've got like a pesticide or something else.
Well, that's all. That's the stuff you don't want on food. That's non-food. But all those phytonutrients and all those chemicals that we haven't yet discovered in certain plants, and certain toxins in plants as well, which we can call them toxins, have them in enough of a dose, and they will be toxic and dangerous. But small amounts, they do the same epigenetic things, don't they?
Yes. Yeah, a little bit of stress. A little bit of stress is good. Our body likes a little bit of stress. We're made to be stressed. That's another thing too. We sometimes think, oh, stress is really bad, and it is chronic, long-term stress. But little stresses, and sometimes we get it from some of our foods, so those toxins, or, the cold shower or whatever it may be, a bit of HIIT training, if you can do that. That little bit of stress actually turns on lots of antioxidant enzymes, genes that actually are involved in healing. And
So shout out to Kane Johnson here, is a mate of mine, ex-Richmond captain. The model he's always talked about is stress plus recovery equals peak performance.
Yes.
And so the idea is that we have to have stress to get up out of bed in the morning, to have a desire. Like even the story I shared earlier, I needed the stress of feeling like I was a nothing and a nobody to get up and to go for it. Clearly I had to clear some of that later because it became a bit of a shadow. But it's the recovery. So you got to stress yourself. So what you're saying is even on the inside, we could put a nutrition in, and there's some elements of that might put the body into stress, and the body then actually has to almost upregulate to deal with that stress.
Yes.
And that can be good for us. So as long as we give that the opportunity to do so, give it whatever space it requires to do that, that's peak performance.
Yeah.
Improves resilience. You know, we hear a lot
Yes.
about resilience.
Which
so-
makes you stronger,
and
and
we're
that's
going
how
to be
we've
talking about
evolved.
resilience in the upcoming few episodes. Anyway.
So hang on, isn't that
yeah.
back to epigenetics? Isn't so all these stresses and things in the environment have caused us to evolve to the point of where we are right now?
Yeah, and if you're watching us on YouTube and wonder, why is she just throwing these like fingers around? If you're listening to the podcast, I'm just making these actions in the air. So the epigenetics, we think of it like a layer of information that sits on top of the DNA, and it regulates when the genes are being turned off and on. So our food influences our epigenetics, our stress, toxins.
It's like a massive switchboard.
Yes.
It kind of sits over your genes and decides which ones.
motherboard.
Which ones are being
Like a motherboard?
which ones are being turned off and on right now. And we also inherit epigenetic patterns from our parents. So when I use the word memories, that's also too because if your parents have been through stresses and trauma, we know that that gets passed on, and that those children might be more likely to suffer with anxiety or, mood and mental health issues because there have been epigenetic changes linked with these mental health, psychological conditions, and they can be
that might be a
inherited.
good segue into me.
So just one sec. So Dr. Bruce Lipton, right?
Yes, I
It's
know Bruce.
Fascinating work, and you've worked with him. One of the things I love about what he says is that the stress that you pick up, you're picking it up from conception through to 7 years of age. Most of your lifelong patterns are picked up. So that's one viewpoint that's out there. But even if that's how holistic that view is, but conception through to 7 years of age. And why conception? Well, whatever your mother and father were going through at the time of conception is almost a birth
And what your mum
of who
ate.
you
That's
are.
and so
Yes.
just a question then. So they have their own epigenetics. My mother and father had their own epigenetics, and certain genes were switched on and switched off. Now I inherit their genes, but do I also inherit the genes that are switched on and off? Does it determine which ones are switched on and off that I inherit?
Yes.
Right.
So, and we can do a whole podcast
Yes.
on this because actually
And
my
we will.
PhD and my postdoctoral fellowship was in obstetrics, fertility and pregnancy. So
Right.
that's what I was doing. I was looking at the methyl groups on the mother's blood and the baby, initially just working with mums, but looking at DNA damage, diet, genetics, how it influences pregnancy. And at that time, this is, 20 years ago, that's when we're really starting to understand the impacts in utero, like the mother's diet, how it changes the epigenetic patterns. But then in my postdoctoral fellowship, we actually brought in the dads as well, and we're looking at the mums and the dads, and we know so much more. And I would just love to dedicate a session to even fertility because
Yes,
it's a
of
big
course. Great
issue.
topic.
Like semen
Yes.
parameters are coming down. Like there's so much from an environmental perspective that we can do, and I will stop there and let you tell your story.
Well, it's such a good segue into
Yes.
my story
Yes.
because
Because your story
epigenetics,
is
I think,
amazing. Yeah.
it really sort of, I think, speaks to me and probably answers so many questions that I struggled with for so long. So I'm going to go right back to like early memories of who I was as a person. And there were the standout things. If I was asked, describe yourself as a 4 or 5 year old child, I was a tyrant. I was a hurricane. And while I'm not diagnosed, I'm convinced that I had ADHD. In fact, I can see it in my family. It's a trait. And so one of the first questions I would have to you is ADHD genetically inherited, and why? If you look back into my family background, they all came from Europe. My grandparents all escaped the war. They escaped the Nazis in World War II and went through a whole lot of stresses. They lost all their families. They would have had all sorts of stresses that just switched on all those genes associated with stress that came down through my parents and to me, because for all intents and purposes, I lived a great life in Australia. I had a wonderful time, but I had certain
Why should
traits.
I be stressed like this?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, look, when I was growing up in the 70s, none of this stuff was acknowledged or even known about. So ADHD, I was just a hyperactive kid who was a bit of a tyrant. But, it affected my school life. I just couldn't sit still and study. For all the frustration that my parents had that clearly he's got some intelligence here, why isn't he applying himself? I just couldn't sit down. And it was nervous
So you were
energy.
just rattling.
Yeah,
You were just rattling on the
absolutely.
inside. Yeah.
And I remember growing up, I had sort of cousins that I'd hang out with and friends, and I was labelled the tyrant kid. So by the time I got to my teenage
So
years,
add that on top of now you're labelled and you're judged, and even if not spoken, it's actually in the ether.
Yeah, well, that's
you're,
it. So
you're in the room and they go, oh, here he is. There he goes again.
Who I am was being defined by my environment. And look, I think growing up as a kid, I probably didn't mind it too much. Well, I suppose everyone's sort of defined by something, and that's who I am. Yeah. By the time I got to my teenage years, no, I didn't want to be that person. You know, I was interested in girls. I wanted to hang out with friends that I didn't want to sort of present myself as this hurricane of an individual. So I kind of suppressed all of that part of myself. I actually shut down a lot of myself. You know, all those parts that I would have associated with who that tyrant was. Wasn't really a tyrant. I can't
imagine you being a
the
tyrant.
idea of a tyrant.
Yes.
You're not really a tyrant.
I wasn't an evil tyrant. I just caused havoc. I couldn't sit still. I'd break things. I'd run up the walls. You know. So a lot of that stuff was just suppressed. I just packed that away, and I just sort of, I'm just going to leave myself with the bits that I like, that I want to present to the world. But it was causing anxiety, you know, and it wasn't obvious in the beginning, but
subliminally
there was
just sitting there the whole time, sitting underneath the whole time.
Because that's who I am. Yeah, absolutely. Now there's sort of a concurrent trend that's also sort of running with this, is that I also remember growing up from a very young age feeling like everything is disconnected when it should be connected. And going back to what you were talking about, how I had that sense that everything is connected, but we're living in a world where we're disconnecting everything. And specific memories about that, like I remember going to St Kilda Pier and looking at all the boats and the oil coming out from the boats and just sort of sitting there on top of the water and thinking, how can we all be one planet and yet we do that? And if it's happening everywhere, then we're killing the planet, aren't we? Like it's becoming sick.
As long as it's not affecting my comfort, I don't
the
even
sicker
notice.
The planet gets, the sicker we get. Like I said before, we rely on our environment. We've
It's one and the same.
We've evolved to where we are because of our environment, and now we're getting sicker, but the planet is getting sicker too.
No, I couldn't formulate that in my head, you know, in such a coherent way, but there was a strong sense of that. And I remember walking through my childhood and into my teenage years with that sense that we have created a disconnect for ourselves. So by the time I was about 17 or 18, I'd finished high school, had no idea what I wanted to do, partly because I was still running against this whole disconnect business. I just don't feel connected to anything, and I don't feel like everything's connected to each other. I met a naturopath, which I didn't know what it was at the time, and I just said, well, what is it and what do you do? And he described it, and it was a holistic form of medicine that addresses the whole body. So if you've got a symptom, a headache, we're not just going to look at your head. We're going to have a look at your whole body and see how it all works together, so that if you've got a gut issue, that might influence your headache. And that just made an instant perfect sense to me. So
someone was all of a sudden speaking the truth to you, rather than you should be okay. Why are you acting like this? Why are you behaving? The world's a good place. We're all good. Just play the game. You know, the oil spilling out, don't worry about it. Not that anyone's saying that, but you know, that's what we're basically saying to each other. As long as you're winning and you're succeeding, don't worry about all that other stuff, you know. And then someone says to you, no, it's all connected. We're going to map it back to a source and an origin and blah, blah, blah. And you would have immediately felt relief. Because once again, the truth sets you free.
Oh, it was an epiphany. It was a jump for joy. It really was. It's like, that's what I'm looking for. That feels so right.
Wow.
I want to do that.
Wow.
So I did. I enrolled, but interestingly, the first class, which was Naturopathic Philosophy 101, they said, if you want to heal, sorry. Excuse me. Hopefully we can edit that out.
No, absolutely. I was going to say that you actually did really well before when you knocked the microphone and you started from the word again. The magic's in the edit, so just go.
Cool.
Yeah, so I was sitting in class and the lecturer said, if we're really talking about healing, real healing, then we're also going to have to address the emotional and the inner stuff. And I remember thinking, oh, shit.
I didn't sign up for that.
I'm going to have to revisit that crap. And I remember shriveling up and thinking, oh, I don't know if this is for me. And it took me like...
Got to feel it to heal it.
Yeah. But it took me a long time to sort of acknowledge that and recognize that and then be brave enough to do that.
Wow.
But healing it was. But there were definitely hiccups along the way. And when I say that is a cause of anxiety, repressing a part of yourself because that's what you were teased about, or that is that part of yourself that you just don't want to show you, that causes enormous anxiety that you're not necessarily aware of, although it might present as symptoms and you just sort of brush it away. But it actually exploded at some point. And it exploded when we talk about my genes. I think that will be an interesting discussion because I became a vegan back then. I was sort of 18, 19. And I reckon I was completely nutrient deficient. No zinc, no protein, no EFAs. I mean, you name it. Everything my brain needed to function properly, I was just depriving myself of.
And genetically too. Genetically, some people actually need more vitamin A, like the animal forms of vitamin A, fat-soluble vitamin A, which you usually get from, animal products, fat, butter, etc. But also some people need more, the omega-3s or B12, iron, and we get a lot of these from our animal foods. Now, I'm not saying people shouldn't be vegan because I think from a planetary standpoint, like, from a ethical standpoint, there's actually a lot of, validity and all that, and I respect some of those
we'll bring
reasons.
Nathan Chong into a conversation around that.
Well, I do respect some of those things because I do want to look after the planet, but the truth is I do think, as someone that looks at genetics and evolution and trying to be the best version of me and age well and be around, I'm an older mother and stuff, I think I know I need those nutrients, and they do come from animal foods. And when you look at evolution, when we've had these big jumps, when I talk about humans kind of almost taking over in a sense, it's in combination with the food we ate. Like when we started to harness fire and then we could cook food, that's when there's been a lot of changes in our brain and the way that we've evolved.
Positive changes, right?
Positive changes with, with us being able to consume more foods. And a lot of those nutrients are coming from animal foods.
Yeah.
Can I just want to come back for a moment and say, when I sit with you, I feel like I'm sitting with a feeler.
Okay.
Someone who feels like a sweetheart.
Yeah.
You've just got such a warm, beautiful depth to you. And every conversation we've had, and we're just getting to know each other, and we'll be intimately connected, through this. But I feel the love in you, all the time. So that's also when you're being made wrong for the way you behaved, it's because you're tuned into the love. But where we're coming from is not the love. We're coming from the whatever it takes, what I talked about before, win at all costs, just get your feed, get your fix, look after your family, all that sort of, paradigm that we're living in on the planet.
Yeah.
So you're being made wrong for rattling around when actually your rattling was your symptom that you're feeling something that's beyond the way we're playing. So hence why it makes perfect sense to me that you went vegan for that period of time, because the feeler in you goes, I'm going down this path. Of course, there's a whole other viewpoints around that.
And we'll talk about that in a lot more depth.
The feeling that, and like yourself, that you couldn't work with the animals anymore and have all that sort of stuff happen. We've got that inside of us. Yet I'm a meat eater and I love it, and I do it respectfully. I'm a fisherman, so I catch every fish and I actually give it a blessing and I hold it and I spike it and I hold it till I feel the fish. Basically, what I'm going to say is leave its body. So I feel the little spirit return to source, so to speak. That's my way of saying it. But to be respectful as I can. Yeah. But it's about a lot of the mistake we make is we make things wrong. So you were made wrong rather than, where's that coming from? What's he feeling? Why is he rattling around so much? You were feeling. That's the thing. The judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree. So you're a feeler. So I just wanted to sort of say that because I was getting that overwhelming while you talk. I almost had tears in my eyes feeling who you actually are. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, you've been on a journey this whole time, because I relate to it myself, and I relate to my son at the moment who's going through quite a bit as well. And it's like, oh my God, you may as well be telling me all about him while you're talking about yourself. And that's the way I see connection, by the way, that we all give each other answers about each other.
I didn't have it any other way. And I had gone through some serious challenges because I said there were these explosions of anxiety that needed to be addressed.
Yes. But they were coming from somewhere.
Yeah, of course.
That was stuff that wasn't just built up in you, it was built up in your family lineage.
Well, that's it.
It had been suppressed by everybody. So at some point in time, it's almost like a breakthrough infection. Yeah. It's a breakthrough feeling, that someone in the family is going to finally feel it. Yeah. Rather than just
and then epigenetically, hopefully switch off some of those genes.
Change it because you can.
My kids, they're too late. I've already got 3 kids, but I would have done a lot of work by then.
But the rest of the family, their job was to survive, to get through those scenarios
absolutely.
until
what
someone
we're
was
talking
comfortable
about-
enough to feel.
Well, we're talking about
Yeah.
my grandparents didn't have the luxury of
No.
even considering exploring
But that's
that.
perfect
Yeah,
too, because
yeah.
you're the person that's come in to go, right, I'm going to change the genetic
Yeah, yeah.
line by finally being able to unsuppress some of this stuff and feel it and feel the whole family trauma.
Yeah, yeah.
And feel it, heal it, release it. I love the word transmutation.
Transmutation.
Experience
yeah.
it fully without resistance, so that it flows through you and doesn't get caught in you.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like then the children and everyone below you go, oh, the genetic line's just altered.
Yeah.
It's just shifted because
Yeah.
we've got a feeler. We've got a feeler. We've got a
Well,
live
it's
one.
not complete because there are certainly
Yes.
family members that have interesting traits that seem to be part of that family,
Yeah.
that family tradition.
As all of
Yeah.
us. Yeah.
But look. So I mean, that's where my journey started. I became a naturopath. Really found myself in the education space. Never set out to do that. I'd worked in functional pathology for a couple of years, but ended up teaching functional pathology to doctors and to other healthcare practitioners. And that translated onto, I suppose my area of interest grew more in biochemistry. So I related nutrition to biochemistry quite easily. So I taught nutritional biochemistry at the Australian College of Nutritional Medicine for years and years. And that translated out into industry. So I worked in various nutraceutical companies, putting together education teams.
What's nutraceutical?
So think of it more
For that
as
person that doesn't know.
So we've got our supplements, our nutritional supplements, and then we've got supplements that are formulated to have therapeutic actions that are often used by clinicians. So they're a little bit more targeted. Often they may be of slightly higher dose.
So what's pharmaceutical?
Well, pharmaceutical is a synthetic. So we're talking drugs.
Okay, so a supplement is a natural thing that's actually been formed.
Well, we're thinking of nutritional supplements.
Yes.
So vitamin A,
Okay.
vitamin C, D. Yeah.
So nutraceuticals halfway between a supplement and pharmaceutical because it's specifically designed to actually address certain things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. So think of it
But
as
it's coming
it's
from
used
nature.
therapeutically to address a condition in clinic, often in clinic, but nutraceuticals are often shown.
And probably should be prescribed by a practitioner
Yes.
that has some knowledge rather than, sometimes people just buy supplements from the supermarket or something like that.
Yeah.
If you're going to the nutraceuticals, because often it might be a higher dose or a certain, so it's
because
targeted.
of potency and et cetera. And if you give the right thing to the wrong person or vice versa, the wrong thing to the right person.
Yeah.
that
And I
right?
think
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, and in I just experimented with all sorts of things as I was going through life. And there were definitely times where I took the wrong nutrient and I knew it, I felt it. So, yes, having a bit of knowledge about what you're taking is probably a good idea.
So I'm looking
did
forward
you-
to that, understanding that for myself.
yeah.
Where I'm taking the wrong nutrients based on my genetics and epigenetics and everything else is because I can feel I'm on the track with a few things, but I'm like, it'll be surprising when I get investigated by you two.
Yeah.
guess what, listeners and people? I think we're going to do a little bit of testing
Yes.
during this podcast as well. So we're going to do that with Trev. But I want to hear about how you came out of being vegan. And did you, when you had that anxiety and that breakdown, did you connect it with the diet and possibly deficiencies then? Or is this something that you've realised later
So
on?
I was 18, turning 19 at the time. I don't know if I had the skills and the knowledge to relate it back to anything. I think it would be good to talk about that when we go through my genetic test. So that will be one episode in itself. I don't think I had what I remember thinking is, I don't want to swear too much, but what the F is going on here? Like, where has this come from? Because the anxiety exploded
feel
in a
this way?
dream. It wasn't like I was walking through life and something made me anxious because I came across someone that, that annoyed me or whatever it was. It was me being asleep and this anxiety exploding in such a visceral way out from a dream.
So you had an experience in a dream.
In a dream.
That opened a little gateway.
Yeah.
And then this flooded through.
Yeah, and it's
then you
happened
would have
more
had
than
the
once in my
whole-
life.
You would have had the mass cortisol production. You would have had the flushing.
Yeah.
And so you're like, oh.
But it actually imprinted itself in my brain for a while. So I had to navigate life through having that feeling of cortisol rushing through my body.
Yeah.
For months and months.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not knowing what was going on. And there's a shame associated with those feelings because I wanted to present to the world that I'm going through life. I can manage everything. I'm in control. And that's what that's all about is I want to be in control. For me, that's what veganism was about. It's a way of me controlling an aspect of my life that I could feel comfortable with, where there were other aspects that I'd suppressed that I wasn't in control of. So there's a fair bit of control.
So
And craving
interesting.
simplicity.
When we talk more about this, I hear you too, because before I got my autoimmune disease, and I definitely feel there was a shame and guilt and blame and all sorts of, you definitely go into I went into a dark place. I'm sure when you're not well, you're not well. You're not well mentally, physically. But I will talk about all the nutrition stuff later, but definitely was quite obsessed about food before I got sick as well. Again, trying to have that control, not really, enjoying food.
We're going to talk about orthorexia as well.
Yes,
so
yes.
Yeah.
I've written down on my little sheet here, dreams and sleep. That's going to be one of our episodes for sure.
Well, interesting.
Because the power of dreams and what the subconscious mind does and can deliver things in during our sleep and our dreams.
Yeah, well, that's when I was most susceptible to my subconscious. And it really was my subconscious yelling at me. It said, I can't get through to you any other way. Whatever symptoms I provide, if you've got a fluttery tummy or if you've got whatever skin breakout, which I didn't really get, but whatever the symptoms were,
you weren't listening.
I wasn't listening.
Yeah.
So
And
it just had said,
I'm
screw it.
sorry,
I'm just
but
going to
have to get you while your guard's
exactly.
down.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll go through all of that in a bit more detail. I think we're sort of heading towards the end of the first episode. Already super interesting.
Yeah.
Look, I think we'll just wrap up with just giving a bit of an explanation of what viewers and listeners can expect, because we're going to be having different formats for this show. This is one of them, where we just have discussions around topics that might interest us. As you might have got the hint, we are going to be as open as we can be, and that also means exposing ourselves to different tests. So we might do our cellular age test. I've got my genetic test there. We might do some bloods, nutrient, whatever it is, and we can discuss those and translate those and see if we can interpret them in a way that makes sense for how our, aspects of our life. But we'll also be going to interview guest experts as well from all the fields that we just covered and more. So
A range of people that, and talk to them about what they're doing to age well, to take care of themselves. And it's going to be a wide variety of guests. So experts, academics, but also real people, some sports people, and some of my patients be coming in to talk about their story, so that you can hear from others too what they've been through. So
we'll take some well-known people through some tests and stuff as well.
Yes.
And before we close, I've got a question for you. And basically,
For me?
Yeah, for all of us. A question for the three of us, Dan, because I want to ask this question to each of our guests when they come in. And what we're actually talking about is fulfilling the human potential. So we're talking about living your life not just in your 60s, 70s and 80s, better, more actively, more intelligent, not basically farming us off to old age homes, being active, all those sort of wonderful things that we could do in later life, and the wisdom that we might have. So there's that part of it. But there's also, from people listening, from this point on, living more aware, more conscious, more understanding of all the things that are connected. So the question I want to ask, it's almost a question about what are you excited about, but the question is, if you could do, and this is what we're going to help people do, what we're working on, Denise, if you had 10 more years in your later life, 10 extra years to what you currently were supposed to have, and those 10 extra years of active, healthy, bright, wise life was available to you, what would you do with it? And what impact would it have?
Big question.
we talked about this over breakfast. You should have had an idea.
No, but I really felt it then. Like I had a little bit of an emotional, and I was like, just breathe, because I don't want to get emotional on the first one. You'll probably see
Get
it, people.
emotional, please. Go for it.
But I guess I was thinking about my kids. I'm an older mum. So I lost my mum.
Yep.
And we'll talk about it, to Alzheimer's. And I'm genetically predisposed, but don't think I'll get it. But my mum didn't have any time with her grandkids.
Yep.
She was in a vegetative state for 10 years. So, in a hospital bed, twice a week, hoisted up to have a shower, fed this gel, wearing nappies, living like that. And this is why I come to all of you, is because we shouldn't have to live like that. There is a flaw in the system. I'm not dissing the whole system, but things need to change. And those 10 years that I will have, because I am trying to live a different way, will be with my grandkids. My little one's only 7. I'm 45. I'm an older mum. I spent so long studying, I almost forgot to have kids. I met my husband a bit later. But, I want to be around for my kids. I want to be around for my grandkids, because I haven't had my mum. I haven't had my mum to help with my children, to be there. I thought she'd be at my wedding. You grow up in a certain way. And I know lots of people listening have probably been through similar things. I'm not the only one.
But you've
Yeah, but that
you've
doesn't
started me
diminish.
too. Like
Yeah.
I've got the tears sitting here as well, you know. Yes. This is the truth.
You know, I'm here wholeheartedly, not just to talk about genetics and science, but to share my story and anything I can to help people move away from that, because what I don't want is for anyone else to suffer the way that my mum did, and it impacts generations, you know, epigenetics, things like that. And we'll get into it later. We'll talk about Alzheimer's, why I got sick. But even part of my journey, I think, was me not dealing with my mum getting sick when I was a teenager.
Right, yeah.
I didn't deal with that well at all. I ran away from it. And I can never get those years back. So being with my grandkids and, you know, actually enjoying my life, not working my butt off, doing whatever, and then just being sick. You know, most people, just quickly, I know we're meant to finish up, but just for those that don't know, when we talk about health span, we are talking about the years that you live while you are healthy and functioning and active, and that's different to lifespan. And at the moment in Australia, on average, there's about a 10-year gap where most people are living with a chronic illness or a disability and they are not able to function on their own, or they're needing support. In other countries, it's up to 20 years, like the UK. We are here to help you close that gap so that you have more years of health, and that is my mission. As much as I want to be with grandkids, I still actually want to be working in this space in those last 10 years as well. So thank you for that question. We said it at breakfast. I didn't think it was going to hit me like that.
I teared myself up asking the question, yeah. Yeah. Do you want me to answer that, or you want to go?
Well, I think mine will be short. I think that looking at my life and the things that made me happy and what I crave is connection. So connection with family, connection with friends, connection with the planet. I mean, there's nothing that makes me happier. I even said that this morning, of going away with friends and just sitting around a fire and just talking, but talking real. So we don't often get a chance to do that. So what's going on in your life really? Those are the moments where I actually feel most joy, where I actually feel like life's worth living. So I want to do more of that. And I want to do more of the things that make me feel like life is good. Listening to music that I really like, playing music. You know, we've all got to continue working. I think I've got to keep the mind going, keeping active. But the thing is I've always worked in an industry that I'm passionate about, that I believe in.
So it's not work.
So, it's work as well. Yeah. But it's meaningful. Yeah. So continuing doing things meaningfully, but I think consciously making those connections. I think because that's what makes life worthwhile, isn't it? I mean, we can try and have health span and take all the right nutrients and do all the exercise and do all the right things, and if we don't have that connection with people and with the world around us, then what is it for? So that's me. Yeah. Cool.
Going to suffer from my own question here. I think, Denise, when you were sharing it, just really hit me as well, because my father he's 90 and sitting in a home with dementia, and I've watched him waste away. And, you know, he was my rock. He was my inspiration. He taught me how to love and connect and to explore and adventure and believe in everything's possible. So the one man that sort of taught me that to believe anything's possible is the one that suffered from that period of time, me not knowing exactly that anything was possible and how to treat that. So it's been, you know, up to around 10 years now, eight to 10 years of real decline. So I feel a sense of failure in myself as a son, you know, that I haven't been able to look after him. I look after a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And my father, who gave me life, who gave me so much, I've watched helplessly as he's faded away. Watched my sister fight for him every step of the way. I felt my own give up at certain stages of losing the relationship and the cognizant relationship, you know, where we can relate back to things. So I suppose I don't want to be that for someone else, that I don't want to go from being an inspiration to the light fading for my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids, etc. I want them to see that anything's possible, and that anything's possible to keep going to a higher point. So I want to take the gift that my father gave me and fulfill that as a human. And I can imagine us sitting at 70 or 80. The podcast is going to go for a long time because it'll be
we're
80
around
years
for a
of
while.
age. But, but to imagine the wisdom, the wisdom of not just myself, but other people living with a longer health span. And I think in old, ancient cultures, the wise were revered, the older were revered. They weren't farmed off to a home. They had so much to give, and in a lot of cultures, the grandparents raise the kids while the parents go off and work because the grandparents are better equipped to raise the children. So I think there's an opportunity here to change a paradigm of this, just use us up. We're kind of like batteries. We just use ourselves up and the system is using us up and we're making our own bed. We take full responsibility. As long as I get comfort, I'll just keep using myself up. And we run out of battery well before we should. We haven't learned how to recharge and everything. So for me, with that extra 10 years, I want to pass that on. I want to live as a demonstration. I've got one fitness goal, and that is at 80 years of age to be able to run up any hill, ski down any mountain and ride any wave with my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. So it's a pretty simple goal, but it's actually quite complex because that means I have to be able to surf pipeline. That means I have to do a double black run at 80 years of age. So what do I have to do moment to moment?
You don't want to just do a blue run with your grandkids?
Yeah, you didn't mention it was going to be double black.
Well, the great-grandkids will be the blue run. The grandkids will be double black because that's what they'll be wanting to do based on the inspiration that I'm going to leave them. But the idea is, so my knees, my body, my faculties, everything, that's my goal. So every day I pick up a piece of food, I go, does that feed my goal of when I'm 80? And I don't want to get, what was that
Orthorexia, become obsessive.
Become obsessive, not at all. I want to be naturally flowing.
It's just about
and everything
nourishing
else.
yourself.
I just want to be aware, So my 10 years is going to be spent leaving it better than I found it. And that's what I kind of felt like you were saying is let's leave it better than we found it. And I imagine when we do my genetics, I'll be predisposed somewhere in there to what my father's been through. So I'm like, well, let's get on that early so I can leave an impact.
There's a whole
and I do a lot
topic
of work in that space, and I'm
in the right place.
Yeah, you can reverse cognitive decline.
I think we probably need to wrap it up there. Great first discussion. How much did we reveal about ourselves?
We haven't even started. We just talked about what we're going to talk about.
Me
too.
God damn it.
All right, well, there's going to be a whole lot more of that.
So we set the scene with swearing, crying. It's all happening. Well, there's not many podcasts where the co-host just gets into tears. So
certainly not off the pilot episode anyway. So,
Let's go there.
All right. Well, thank you all so far for the first episode.
Dan. Thanks, Denise.
For everyone that's watching and listening, we encourage you to like and subscribe. And also we're going to encourage you to contact us. So we want you to be part of the community. We want to be able to have conversations with you. Anything that you want to discuss, shoot through an email at info@futurelabpodcast.com.au. And we will address those and let's see what sort of conversations we can foster out of that as well. So, all you guys,
well done.
Fantastic.
Thank
you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you again.